Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Givens. I work at the Babe Ruth Museum, and this is the third virtual interview that we have attempted since the pandemic clicked in back in March. And we appreciate all of you for tuning in. Tonight we have terrific guests, very topical stuff. Gary Williams, Hall of Fame coach from the University of Maryland, and Billy Jones, who played with Gary in the mid 60s at Maryland and was the first African-American offered a scholarship in the ACC. We're going to take you through all of that, take you through their playing careers together. They both went on to coach. And so, we're going to go down that athletic trail. Before we get going, I do want to bring you a little bit of an update on the museum. I was telling the guys that we reopened yesterday. We had closed on March 15th. That was our last day when we had visitors. So it's been over 3 months. And, we had several people come through the museum. About 20 showed up to come on down and take a look. So if you want to get some sports this weekend or in the near future, come on down and pay us a visit. We are planning to open a new exhibit featuring some of the sports legends collection, which would include Maryland Terrapin stuff, Baltimore Ravens, Colts, Orioles, that kind of stuff. That will be coming to the Babe Ruth birthplace around the time that the Orioles are scheduled to open their season on July 24th. So we're doing the best that we can to try and keep sports, our local sports, in front of our fans. And the effort that we're doing tonight, thanks to Gary and Billy, is part of that initiative. So anyway, one other thing before we get going, I want to thank Maureen Kilcullen, who is a personal friend of Billy and helped us connect and put this show together, along with Sean Hearn, our executive director, Bob McKinney, and Barry Gossett, our co-chairs of the board of the Babe Ruth Birthplace Foundation, and certainly our producer engineer this evening, Katie Dick, for her good work. So with that said, Gary, Billy, welcome to our program, and thank you for being here. Gary, you started off playing, and you played 3 years of varsity ball under Bud Milliken, 64 through 67, and Bill, you came a year later. You guys had 2 years of crossover playing together, and so I'd just like to talk about that a little bit. You guys, I went back and looked at the records. You had some big wins in those couple of years together, but overall, as a team, it was kind of a Midland thing. You went 51-49 in the 4 years that the two of you were playing at Maryland. So, from a basketball perspective, how was it under Milliken and Frank Fellows in your last year there, Bill? How was it playing at Maryland back at that time?
I'll let you lead there, Gary.
Well,
respecting my seniors.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for pointing out I got you by a year. I think the thing that playing for Bud Milliken, Billy and I both wound up coaching. Joe Harrington wound up coaching. Terry Truax wound up. These are all our teammates. And Billy Franklin was a very successful high school coach locally at Bowie. And Neil Brayton even coached a high school team over in Chestertown for a couple of years. So that was Milliken's coaching. You learned, if you wanted to play, you had to learn how to play basketball. You had to be a good defensive player, or at least make the effort to be a good defensive player, and know where the ball should go on every play. The problem was, for me, I always would go home in the summertime. Back then, Billy, players actually worked in the summertime. They got jobs, and so I was working up there in South Jersey, near Camden and Philadelphia, and we played in a couple leagues and things like that. And I always had to pick up my individual skills again, because there wasn't much leeway in the way Bud Milliken coached to allow a player to do what he can do best. And I always regretted that as a player. I don't know how you felt about that, Billy, but I always thought that, well, I give you my senior year, your junior year, we had Pete Johnson, yourself, and myself playing, starting most games, and we were really quick, and we knew how to play, but we walked the ball up the court for 40 minutes every game.
Yeah, I would agree. I think when it comes to learning the game, Bud was absolutely the best. And his defenses, well, were way beyond anybody else, the way it's taught and also being creative. But on the offensive end, you had to be, his program, you had to be in certain spots at certain times, designated, et cetera. And if I could do anything differently, I would open the game up a little bit more and go more to the talent as opposed to the system, very system oriented.
Yeah, I always thought that was Hank Iba's system, a great pioneer in the game with his defense. But Bud never opened up the offense. My sophomore year, when you were back then, freshmen couldn't play varsity. So Billy was playing on a freshman team. I was a sophomore. We probably had a very good team. I think we were 18-8. We tied for second in the league, and we had most of those guys back, plus you coming up to the varsity the next year. And that was the year I thought we were really talented, my junior year.
Mm-hmm.
And you were a sophomore, and we just didn't get it done. But that year we were good enough to beat Elvin Hayes in Houston. Yep. And we beat Donnie May and Henry Finkel, and they went to the Final Four the next year from Dayton. So we had our games, my junior year. That was probably the most talent that we had in my 4 years at Maryland.
I would agree that team was good enough under the current system. We would have been an NCAA team,
right?
Probably a 4 or 5 seed, but we would definitely play in the tournament. At that time, you had to win the ACC tournament just to get in the NCAAs. But that was a talented team.
Yeah. So for those teams, were you considered small sized for that time? Because Bill, you were 6 feet 1 and played forward.
Bill, what are you shrinking? You used to be 6'3".
6'2". It's kind of funny. At that point in time, we did everything by numbers, 1 through 5s. And today you can see the games played as 4 1s on the floor and 1 5. So I like to think it was more a 3-guard offense, sort of like when Mo Howard was at Maryland. Mo Howard was not a forward, but Mo played with Brad and Luke, and they were like 3-guard offense. And I thought of us, Gary, is pretty much the same way.
Yeah,
I was the biggest of the 3, so I'd always cover the bigger guys.
Yeah, well, we say, Billy, take the big guy. That's why. But like we would always, all 3 of us could handle the ball. I think we knew the game pretty well. We could hit the open man. I wasn't a good shooter. Pete Johnson was our best shooter.
He was actually an offensive player.
I thought he had skills that if they ever let him go, he would average 20 points a game in the ACC. Yeah. I really believe that.
Yeah. And when I think of in terms of limiting, I do think the person who's most affected by that was Pete. Because Pete had skills that he was beyond the years with his offensive skills. He's very advanced.
Pete really knew the game. Go ahead.
So Billy, you accepted the scholarship in April of 1964. You become the first African American to earn a full scholarship in the ACC. And then you played freshman ball. And when you joined the varsity, we get to December of 65, and you're playing on the road in Penn State. Then you come home for your first home game on the varsity against Wake Forest at Cole Fieldhouse. And 11,300 people, the largest crowd ever to attend a game at Cole to that point, showed up. They wanted to see what all of this was about. And they saw you score your first basket. Can you, both of you, take us through the emotion of that first home game and that season?
Well, personally, I was probably more wound up than anything, and probably needed a sedative to appropriately approach the game. But I was just so excited to get an ACC game. Penn State was great, but ACC game against Wake Forest was paramount to my thinking, and it was pretty exciting.
Right, Gary, thoughts?
Yeah, I remember, back then, because there was a freshman team, you play against those guys a lot when you were a sophomore, and so we had gotten comfortable, in terms of playing and things like that. And the actual historical part, I think, as Billy said, you're so pumped up for the game. You get into the game, and maybe it was after it was over, you realize what just happened, but. The ACC had prided themselves on being this Southern Conference that still could compete nationally as other conferences had integrated. And so it was a very historical night. It did not get much play like in the Washington DC area, like it should have.
Okay.
Growing up, you watched ACC games in Baltimore. Art Heyman, Jeff Mullins, those guys. That was the top basketball we saw in Baltimore. And just the idea of getting into that league and competing against them, that's what I wanted to do. So the weight game was like, I've arrived. Now I can play at the level I want to play at.
Yeah. So, Bill, you came out of Towson High. You were a two-time All-State player. And also, by the way, you played midfield on the lacrosse team in your senior year. That's pretty cool. But what was it, the ACC that propelled you to go to Maryland?
Yeah, Coach Milligan never had me down for a recruiting trip, and it wasn't necessary. We played all 3 years of high school. We played at Cole Fieldhouse. I'd been there for Boys State. I spent a week on the campus, and 60% of my high school graduates, they went to College Park. So it seemed natural to me to go to school with Steve Pfeiffer, who played lacrosse, as well, other guys who were playing baseball. It was a natural thing to do. So I never took a recruiting trip to College Park.
I was reading a bio on you, and it mentions that when you arrived at College Park, there were about 250 Black students on campus out of 13,000 overall population. Well, how was that? You were okay?
Well, it wasn't okay. It was just a matter of having to adjust. Pete and I, we were roommates for 4 years. We became very close. I think a lot of it had to do with the environment. We had support, and even though I played in the first ACC game, I felt like Pete played with me because Pete's mind was heavily into my thinking. We talked an awful lot. So we supported each other, and also Ernie Terrain and Alvin Lee were two football players out of Poly in Baltimore. So the four of us became a support group. It was tough. College Park was tough in the early 60s. It was tough.
Hey, Gary, I read that you and Billy kind of got along from the beginning. How did the team react to Bill coming on to the squad?
Well, I think the great thing about sports is that if a guy can play and he's a good guy, then that stuff goes away pretty quick, where people might be apprehensive or whatever, because you're with a person every day. You're both working really hard for the same thing, trying to have a good team. And so, sports is always, in my mind, and maybe because I've been connected with sports my whole life, basically, is, in the forefront of things that happen between, different groups of people. And I think that's how we looked at Billy. And, a lot of it had to do with Billy. And Billy, I don't blow a lot of smoke. He never played for me, but, but Billy, he made it easy to like Billy. In other words, he competed and he was strong. He was stronger than me, which really bothered me. Like, we had to go against each other in practice because he could push me around a little bit, But he would bring it every day. Billy would bring it every day. I tried to bring it every day. I thought Pete Johnson did. The guys we played with our senior year, guys like Rich Dresser, who I think he won the Pan Am games in the discus. He was a very strong player, but maybe 6'5", 6'6". We weren't a very big team, but nobody outworked us. Nobody worked harder than we did. And we started off really good that year. We were good enough to play. And then all of a sudden, we got tired, I think, because we weren't playing a lot of guys.
I remember the third day of school. At that time, Cole Fieldhouse is used for registration. And so we used to go down to DeMatha and play ball. Right. And I remember going down there, and I felt like Gary and those guys couldn't wait to get at Pete and I. And little did they know, we couldn't wait to get at them. So we really wanted to bang and let these guys know we can play. And as a result of that, I think we quickly gained their respect.
Yeah, I was worried about you, Billy, but I was more worried about Pete because he was a point guard, And I just thought, and like it took about 10 minutes to realize he could do some things that I couldn't do, So Pete he had the behind the back dribble, the dribble between the legs, the spins, all that stuff, and he had that little hesitation where he'd kick his feet up on his jump shot, and we weren't allowed to do that playing for Milliken, so that was my first thought was, what's Pete going to do? Like how's he going to play his game? But he adjusted, and he was really a good player for us.
Yeah.
So we're talking the timing on this is like 1965, 1966. And these are tough times for those who did not live it, as we did. The 60s was an interesting period. But in that time, you guys hit the road, you go to Tobacco Road. And talk about your reception down there with Bill on the team, and restaurants and hotels and train stations. And what was it like for you, Billy, and Gary, for the whole team? What did you guys have to cope with?
Well, it's, being a young black kid at that point in time, I had an antenna. Antenna told me what's not a good situation and where not to be, et cetera. That's just the way we were built at that point in time. And there were things happening that I was not privy to until sometimes after they happened. For instance, we're in a restaurant, we're in a hotel, and all of a sudden we're packing our bags up and getting back on the bus. I really don't know why. I found out later it's because I can't stay there. And so we had a lot of those experiences where I did not know what was happening at the time. I wasn't privy. But I knew that you need to be alert when you're traveling, particularly going into the Carolinas, et cetera. And I have to give Gary credit. Those guys looked out for me almost to the point they try to baby me sometimes. And the only bad advice they gave me in 3 years, they get 2 years together, they invited me to go play pool in Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah.
My intellect and better judgment told me, no, go stop.
Yeah, I remember we played Duke, and we were going to take the train back to College Park that night. The train was going to leave like at midnight or whatever. We went to a snack bar right there at this old train station in Durham, and they would, that was the most obvious thing to me. They just wouldn't serve us there. We had to get on a train and didn't eat, that type of thing. But that happened. The thing I was most concerned about was going to the road trip. Then was you played at Clemson, at South Carolina, and I thought those two places, I'm not sure there had been a black spectator in those gyms when we went in there to play. And South Carolina was really good. They had Harlicka and Thompson and those guys, and they were good basketball teams. And Clemson was nuts. You went downstairs into the gym at Clemson, and a very low ceiling for a college gym, but and so they were all new experiences for the people there. I think there was a curiosity factor, just to see what Billy was like. How'd he play? Was he a bad guy? All those things came into play back then.
There were comments, and not that I didn't anticipate there would be, not as threatening as I thought possibly sometimes, but there were comments you just had to ignore them and just get on with it. Because if you responded to everything you saw, I'd be fighting instead of playing basketball, and that would not go well with Bud Milligan. So you just had to blank some things out, but it was not a very, very nice place. Particularly Clemson, South Carolina, were not very nice places to go.
You could hear things. So, you heard things. And I don't know if Billy, if you noticed, but when you were introduced in the starting lineup, the other players wouldn't get too close to you when you came out for the starting lineup, because down there, you never knew. You never know what was going to happen. Did you ever feel that like some wacko guy would come into a gym and go after you personally and not worry about what happened to him?
No, as long as I think we were insulated. Most of the Carolina, South Carolina had the old gym, and it was where you're actually seated away from the bleachers and what have you. So I felt safe, and what bothered me would be in an arena where the fans are right behind you. That did bother me a little bit.
I was hoping at Clemson you didn't go in for a layup, because they had the football team. Remember how they put the football team running in the basket? Yeah. And I don't know if Billy would have gotten out of that stands if he went in hard for a layup at that time.
No.
Oh, speaking of football, Maryland was the first ACC school to integrate with the football program as well. And Darrell Hill came in 1963. Bill, did he share his experience with you? Did that help you in any way?
Darrell was like a big brother when we got to College Park. It was Darrell's senior year. And we spent considerable time with Darrell, because Darrell knew the ins and outs, plus he knew all the folks in Washington, D.C. So he took us under his wings when we got to College Park, and he shared a lot of experiences. So he helped a lot.
Didn't Darrell transfer from Navy? He was started at the Naval Academy and he transferred to Maryland.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But he was a great wide receiver. I mean, he was legit.
So after you both graduated, you pursued the coaching careers. Gary, can you take up? We know we know what happened to you. We know where you ended up. That's for sure. But take us through the early days of your coaching. I mean, you're coaching soccer in high school or whatever. How did all that happen?
I was my first job out of Maryland was a junior varsity basketball coach at Woodrow Wilson High School in Camden, New Jersey. And, you know, I probably learned more there in the 3 years I was at the high school than I did my 4 years in Maryland. And it was a great learning experience. And, you know, having to teach, and I wasn't, you know, trained to be a teacher. I was a business major. So all those things came into play. And, you know, I had really good guys, and, you know, you worked with them to try to get them to go to college and things like that. And so it was a great learning experience. Tom Davis, who Billy knows pretty well, was an assistant at Maryland, I guess Billy's senior year. And Tom went with Tom Young. You know, there are two outstanding coaches, to American U when Frank Fellows was let go and Lefty Driesell came in. And so they had Kermit Washington. They had a great year. So Tom Davis got the Lafayette College job up in Pennsylvania. So he called me up, and I had gotten to know him, you know, during my time in Maryland. And he said, "I want you to be my assistant coach." And I said, "Great, I'm there. No problem." He says, "Well, there's one thing. They never had a full-time assistant basketball coach before, but the soccer coach is leaving. So the money's in the budget." This is 1970 now, 71. The money's in the budget for a soccer coach. So you got to coach soccer if you want the assistant basketball coaching job. I hadn't even seen a soccer game. This is 1971, you know? And so the athletic director said, "Look, just take it for a year and, you know, coach the soccer team, and, you know, we'll get somebody in here." Well, 6 years later, when I was still coaching soccer at Lafayette College, it was a good experience. But you know what? It really benefited me personally because I made head coaching decisions at a very young age. And I think that really helped me in my career, because you make the same decisions, whatever the sport is. You're still trying to win. You're still trying to play the best guys, make the best team, all those things.
Right. So, you know, you go up through the ranks, and ultimately you end up at Ohio State, and then the Maryland job comes available. No hesitation on your part to come back to your alma mater, right?
Oh, there was hesitation because of the situation at Maryland. Len Bias had died in 86, and then Bob Wade did not work out. And Bob Wade was a legend in the state of Maryland. I mean, he was a great high school coach, and football player, NFL, you know, all those things. And so I would have never left Ohio State except for the University of Maryland job. And I guess there was a pull there because I had played there, and I always felt that Maryland could be a great basketball program. And, you know, Lefty Driesell had got it going and kind of moved Maryland into the modern age of basketball. And Lefty, and people joke about this, but it's not a joke. He put the seats on the floor at Cole Fieldhouse, and that changed that gym. Billy will tell you, it was like playing in a museum when we played there. The fans are so really far away from where we were, you know, it was just, but all of a sudden here comes the seats, and that became, you know, 15,000 seats, hot, tough for visiting teams to play, fans right up close to everybody. And it was a great place. I was very fortunate to coach in Cole Fieldhouse.
So aside from the national championship, another great moment in your coaching career at Maryland, anything stand out?
Yeah, we really struggled. We received sanctions from the NCAA as I got the job, with 2 years banned from the NCAA tournament, no live television. We lost 3 scholarships and, you know, fined some money. And so it was very difficult to recruit, but we were able to get Dwayne Simpkins, who's now an assistant coach at George Mason, X-Ray Hip, and Johnny Rhodes, who was the all-time leading steals guy in the ACC, get them to come. And then the next year, we got one of the most famous Baltimore players ever in Keith Booth and Joe Smith, who became the Naismith Player of the Year. So those 5 guys, we had two freshmen and 3 sophomores in the starting lineup. We went from winning 3 games in the ACC to the next year of getting to the Sweet 16 and beating UMass with Marcus Camby. And the game that stands out, though, is the Georgetown game in the old Capitol Center, because Georgetown was ranked. We had been bad the year before, and it was like the opening game. And back then, he didn't play till like Thanksgiving week. And we were the only game on television. It was on ESPN nationwide game, and we beat Georgetown in overtime. And that kind of got the program jump started.
Yeah, as a fan, it was so exciting, and it just lifted the whole community, which is what sports can do, and your guys really did. Billy, you started your coaching career. You were an assistant at American U, then you were at University of California at Santa Barbara, and then Stanford before finally coming over here to coach the UMBC Retrievers. Tell us about that. I mean, you had some good seasons there, so tell us about UMBC, and were you very excited when they upset Virginia?
For the Virginia game, absolutely. I mean, I just lost it, jumping up and down watching that game. And I just went to a reunion of the 79-80 team in January of last year. It was very emotional. We started the program from scratch. Local kids, influx of kids in neighboring states, Jersey, Virginia, et cetera, and built a program that was nationally. We had a run of about 5 years. We were very, very good, and had two particular teams that were nationally ranked. And went on the road and we go down to some local school Division Ones, beat a couple of Division Ones, and wound up winning the Eastern Regionals, and were ranked like 5 and 6 in the country. And then their influx of Division One came. We had a great league in the state of Maryland with Mount St. Mary's, et cetera. And then Everett, Towson, UB, they all went Division One. And at one time we had Morgan, national champions, Coppin State, national champions, Mount #3, University of Baltimore #7, Towson 9, and us we were like 17th to start the season. Great Division II basketball. And we had some very, very good teams that could compete low major.
It's amazing to me, the recall that both of you have. It's like I can take you to any game and you do it. You bring it right out there.
That's about it for me, though. That's all I remember now.
No, it's amazing how those games come back to even down to the play. And just to watch a bunch of kids, we didn't get the great player out of high school. We got kids that Lefty would get on late, and 6'8", one kid in particular, John Gedeke, 6'9", slender, starting to develop, and Lefty got on him late. And we wrapped him up. John grows into a 6'9", 2+ and a very, very good player, was all-time leading scorer at one time. And we had those kind of kids that you just watch them grow. And Gary can tell you that Gary was into development also. And a lot of his kids got better as they stayed there. And that's not the case with all programs. Some kids stabilize and they never get better. But our kids had to get better if we were going to be good. But it's a great run at UMBC.
So, Billy, after UMBC, you went into the private sector, and you ended your business career working for Disney World in 2011. Were you still active? Did you play basketball after you stopped coaching, or what was your attachment or affiliation with the game?
I followed a lot of ball, and I tried to see Gary team as much as possible. They'd come down to play in the Thanksgiving tournament at Disney. I'd go out there, and every once in a while, and I never talked to Gary about this, but here's a great time to talk. I think I went back to 8 games, and Gary had me on the bench, and we were like 7-0. And I always go back for Duke or Carolina. I mean, I'm 7-0.
You didn't duck the big game.
I go to the Carolina game. That was a game where Carolina was a national championship, and May hits. I think he blocks his shot right at the end of the game. You remember that, Gary?
Yeah.
Blocked shot right at the end of the game. And Gary never invited me back again.
That's not true.
I was 7-1, which is not a bad record, but I really watched Maryland basketball. And what I always wanted to do, but I felt inhibited, I wanted to take some of the pro players, for instance, would be Dwight Howard here, and just spend time with them, because I think a lot of fundamentals were lacking in the game. But a lot of those guys, if they didn't know you, that you could not approach them. But I always wanted to do that. And Dennis Scott for one, Gary. I think with his great jump shot, boy, if he had a 2-dribble move or go to the basket, he would be phenomenal. And I always wanted to do that. So I worked with some guys locally, one-on-ones, but never, coaching sport. No, the kids changed. And I think the time I got out, John Thompson gets out, Dean gets out, there's a whole bunch of guys. The kids were changing, Gary.
That's when I got out. A little
it was best
after
for me
that.
to move on.
Yeah, but I think a player like you who kind of had to learn how to play an inside position in addition to really being a natural guard. Those skills, a lot of big guys that are really talented, they don't think they need anything anymore. They won't even accept changing their shot, just a foul shot or something like that. So instead of shooting 50%, they would shoot 65%. They just, like you said, they don't want to hear it right now. And they're making a ton of money at the level they're at. So why spend the time worrying about changing things?
But there's a kid 2 houses down, just moved in, and he set up a court, basket in front of his house. I watched him shoot and dribble the other day. He's an 8th grader. And without imposing myself upon this kid, I went to the mailbox and looked at him and said, I could help him. And I turned around and came back to my house. But at some point, if he asked, I would gladly help him develop his game. And I do enjoy that. Love the kids, love the development piece of it. Didn't miss the recruiting, Gary. Did not.
Yeah, I'm with you. I always, I was accused of not being a good recruiter during the time at Maryland, but we had the 3rd most players go to the NBA in the ACC behind Carolina and Duke. And, everybody in the country is behind Carolina and Duke, in terms of pro players going to the NBA. So what we did is what you did is we would get a player. Juan Dixon's a very good example from Calvert Hall. He was a good high school player. He was thin, he was skinny. He didn't weigh more than 140 pounds in high school. But you can't measure a kid's heart. You can't measure, there's certain intangibles that all great players have. But even guys that might not have the great talent, that's still going to drive them further than some guys that don't have those same characteristics. And I always felt great that Juan went from being written in the Baltimore Sun that he wasn't big enough to play in the ACC to being the MVP of the national championship game. And I'll never forgotten that, because that was my whole thing in coaching, was to see how good we could become as a team.
Gary, a question I've never asked you, but I think I may. In terms of the way you play the game and basically the way I play the game, I have a greater appreciation for guys that don't necessarily score. And I had a kid named Jeff Brooks who played for UMBC. Jeff averaged maybe 7, 8 points a game, commandeered the defense, kept us going, et cetera. And I honestly thought Jeff was the best team we had. I thought Jeff was the MVP. And there are guys that don't put up numbers. Steve Blake, and he's College Park. Steve was a phenomenal player. Big scorer, no, hit big buckets. But I have a greater appreciation for the guys that kind of make it work. And I think that's when you have, I guess, a very intelligent viewing of basketball from my perspective. How do people contribute to the flow of the game? And Steve Blake was a great example of a guy who's never going to make the scoring column, but guess what? You don't go far without his contribution.
Yeah, he averaged 10 points a game his junior and senior years at Maryland, and he played in the NBA for 13 years. So that ought to be a lesson for a lot of young kids that think, oh, I got to get 20, I got to have this great move or whatever. All Steve knew how to do was to run the team. And we had really good players with him. We had 3 other guys make the NBA: Lonnie Baxter, Chris Wilcox, made the NBA, and along with Juan Dixon. And so as long as we had control out there on the court, and that's what the great players give you. They give you control. You as a coach, you're on the bench, you see some things happening on some teams. They're really good. They're really talented, but they're doing crazy stuff, that's not going to let them win. And so then you have a chance. If you're not as good as they are, then you have a chance to win.
So let's shift gears a little bit here. I wanted to talk some about the pandemic and what your thoughts are about college athletics. This is the great unknown now. What are you hearing? What kind of vibes are you getting out of College Park or anywhere in the NCAA? What do you think is going to happen here?
I'm listening to verbiage coming out of the University of Central Florida, and with their football, I don't know how they're going to make it happen. The kids are still testing positive, and I don't know how you isolate them, particularly with a contact sport where you're up close basketball and football, you're on top of each other. So I'm a little bit fearful for the upcoming season. I don't know how it's going to happen unless something changes drastically. And Florida's very high right now with coronavirus, so I don't know how it's going to happen here.
Yeah, I kind of, I think the Maryland football team's back on campus now. They still might be in quarantine. I don't know if they started their workouts yet or whatever. But here's what I worry about. I mean, these guys, they're great athletes. They're young, 18 to 22. And so if they're exposed to each other or whatever, yeah, they might get some symptoms or whatever. But what happens is they'll meet other people. They'll go home and see their parents. They'll go with people a lot older than they, and they're the people that are susceptible to it. Now, I don't see how you keep that from happening. Plus, the fan base, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with the fans? Are you going to let 10,000 people in the Maryland Stadium, or is it 20? What's the right number? And all you need is one or two. Everybody sees the multiplication factors with the coronavirus, and so it's going to be really tough. And I hate to say it, but I think good old television and the money is playing a big part in this again. In other words, the networks are desperate to have college football on Saturdays in the fall. And, there's a lot of money there for the schools. If you're in a power conference in football, you're making millions and millions of dollars just off of TV contracts before anybody enters the stands. And so the schools need the money. And it's going to be interesting what it comes down to, because the safety of the players and the people around the players are the most important thing.
Last question before we go to the audience for their questions. So we've got racial tension again. It's crescendoing in different ways maybe than the 1960s, when you both were on the front line of dealing with this. And is America poised to make some change here? How do you feel about that?
This is about the fourth or fifth go around for me where something happens, we're about change, and all of a sudden we go back to sleep and nothing happens. But with this particular the crisis right now, the young folks have mobilized, and I think that's the difference than previously. And I don't think it's going away. So I think we're going to have to look at making some change. Again, they're going to be slow. So if we're expecting change overnight, it doesn't happen like that. We're talking mindset. But I do think this group will not let it go, and nor should they let it go. So I think it's a little different than it was in the 60s, early 70s, and even in the 80s. So I do think change will happen.
Gary?
Yeah, I was, there with everything that happened during the time that Billy mentioned. I think the biggest thing that what I've seen in this, people have to realize that what people want, what people want is for things to be equal. In other words, take it to a player, which, I do too much, but if I'm a player, I just want the same chance that everybody else has. And then it's up to me, to get it done or not get it done. It hasn't been equal. It hasn't been equal. I mean, I coached, African American kids my whole coaching career, and I saw some of their situations. So they didn't have a chance. They couldn't get a good education in high school. It was impossible. And yet, nothing's really been done. So if this movement just brings people to an equal point, I think would be a great thing.
You have social media, which you didn't have to the same extent in the 60s. So things are instant now. Videos are really waking us up that we didn't have previously. So I think with the impact of social media, I think will be a driving force.
Okay, I actually have a question for each one. And both of them go back in history. So Billy, growing up around Towson, a couple years behind you, playing rec league ball, you were a god, you were an icon. And when you went to Maryland—
Would you tell my wife that?
What was that?
Well, no, you were, and played a lot of basketball with guys who emulated you and respected you. But you left out something. You were at Towson and you were the state champs.
Yes.
And that was, for us, that was a huge big deal. What was it for you?
Well, at the time, Baltimore County schools never did very well in state playoffs. Prince George's County, Montgomery County, they won everything. And we went 3 straight years, lost in semifinals, won it as a junior, lost in finals as a senior. So it was huge, and I think kind of put Baltimore basketball on the map. We're for real in Baltimore, and this is before the dominance of Dunbar, et cetera. But they didn't take us seriously until then.
Well, it's interesting because it was before Dunbar, and I think people forget the legacy you brought. And thanks for doing it, Towson. And Gary, you didn't mention, in my opinion, the guy who, and this could be really insulting, but the guy who catapulted your career in Maryland, which is Walt Williams. And am I off base on that?
No, Walt was, he was there when I got the job. He was a freshman in '89. And then Walt was my kind of player because he really knew how to play. I didn't have to teach Walt how to play basketball. What he was searching for a position. And I don't know if it was dumb luck or whatever, but I figured out he didn't need a position. He was like a Golden State Warrior player. He could play the four. He could be a power forward. He could bring the ball up against pressure. And then he was a great shooter. But Walt still has the record in the ACC, in ACC games, for scoring 30 or more in 8 consecutive games. And we weren't that good that year. And defenses were all set up to stop Walt Williams. So Walt was one of the great, players that I ever coached, for sure. And he's still doing radio now at the University of Maryland basketball.
And doing a good job. Very good job.
Billy and Gary. Well, first off, Billy, I said I had the pleasure. I went to Kenwood High School around the same time you were at Towson, and I had the good fortune to play against you, and it wasn't a terribly pleasurable experience. But it was.
These folks are very flattering, Gary.
Hey, Billy fouled a lot. I know that from playing against him in practice.
But I wanted to ask you, both of you, your reactions, particularly you, Billy, in light of what's going on now with all the stuff with the racial unrest and the trying to hopefully move in a direction to be positive for all concerned. But back in 1966, when the national championship was held in College Park and Texas Western beat Kentucky, given the makeup of Texas Western's team, how did that make you feel? Did that bring a lot of pride in you? Did it give you some kind of impetus to want to be better? And then Gary, I'd like to know your reaction to that whole thing when that occurred too.
Well, first of all, Duke was in that tournament. They represented the ACC in the Final Four. So I wanted Duke to win, and they didn't win. But Texas Western, I really felt, very, very good about the fact they beat Kentucky. Kentucky was, I guess, considered the class of the country at that point in time. Adolph Rupp, and they were smooth. I watched them practice. Very impressed with the way they practiced. I mean, they were a classy outfit. But I was very, very pleased that Texas Western beat them. And it did make me feel good.
Yeah, Billy and I went to that game, in fact, in Cole Fieldhouse. And the thing I remember about the game was that after about 5 minutes, you start looking around at each other and saying, these guys are really good, from Texas Western. And back then, Texas Western was never on television. You never got a chance to see them play or anything like that. And so what impressed me with Don Haskins, who was really a good coach, what impressed me about him was he was not afraid to start 5 African-American players. And that took a lot of guts back then. People forget.
Unheard of.
What it was like. You didn't do that. You just didn't do that. They would, people would say, well, and you heard it the day before with Texas Western. They're talented, but they don't run very good offense. So they don't know how to play, and all this stuff. And they were going to max out just with their ability. Oh, and here's Kentucky runts, what they call them, Rupp's runts, whatever they were called. But Pat Riley jumped center. Louis Gampier was a great shooter. They had good players, but Texas Western was just better than they were. I thought the best team definitely won that game.
Gary, the irony was that Texas Western did not look that good in the semifinal. Right. After the semifinal game, I was not sure. I'd say, I don't think so.
Jerry Chambers in Utah. Chambers in Utah took it. Yeah. They and the other thing was Haskins would start different teams during the year. He started. There was this one white guy that started quite a few games for him. He just looked at Kentucky and he matched up the best team he could put on the floor, and he put it out there, which a lot of coaches wouldn't do back then. They wouldn't put their best team on the floor to start a game.
And like you said, Gary, 7 minutes into the game, these guys not only have a chance, they could win.
Oh, yeah. I thought the best team definitely won that night.
Yeah.
Hey, Gary, Bob Heavenstein, how are you?
Good, Bob. How you doing?
Doing well. So first of all, I was at that game also, and a great game. In fact, I still have the ticket stub, which was $7. I think if I remember the story, Gary, you came in through the back door or something like that.
Well, we knew the guy. Billy and I knew the guy. That's how we got into our games. And so we just waved like it was one of our games. And that was probably an NCAA violation if that happened today, though. So,
But you could buy the ticket that week and get a great seat.
Yeah.
I mean, a little bit different than today. And that was quite something. But the question I have for both of you, I was a freshman, Billy, when you were a freshman. So I went to most of those games over the years. And it seemed to me, thinking about what you said in terms of some of the limitations that Coach Milliken had on staying with the system versus maybe all of the talent. But it seemed to me that most of the games, this is my memory, maybe it's way off, is we were ahead at halftime. And then the games that we lost, we just couldn't do it in the second half. And I just like to know, is that a good recollection? And what happened in the second half? So was it again due to some system limitations, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Gary, in terms of, I don't remember how much we were ahead at halftime, but we were in a lot of ball games. I go back to the Carolina and Duke games. Those games are in question right down to the end. And then I don't know if it's fatigue, because we didn't play a lot of people. We really didn't play a lot of people. And most of those clubs were at that time, Duke, Carolina, those teams were deep. And so maybe fatigue did become a factor, and therefore they're stronger down the stretch. But we were in a lot of ball games. We scrapped.
yeah, I thought that the way we played, we would keep teams not as good as us in games, but we would stay with teams that were better than us. And so we'd win some of those games in each of those situations. Then the other thing you mentioned about conditioning, I really felt that at practice, we almost were all half court in practice, half court defense, half court offense. So all of a sudden you get against a Duke and a Carolina, and they're going to go 94 feet the whole game, and they're going to up tempo and sub and do all that. If we played 7 guys, that was because one guy got in foul trouble. If we played 7 guys a lot of times, and that's very difficult to do when you play against good players that have multiple players at each position.
So it was a system limitation when you think about it, when you put it to that degree.
Just weren't deep enough, I think. Just were not deep enough.
I think we had a big drop off after the first 7 or 8 guys.
Okay, it was so much fun to hear you talk about 1966, but I just want to tell you, in 1970, when Jacksonville University was playing UCLA in Cole Fieldhouse for the national championship, my first child was born that day. And my husband and I had tickets to the game that night. And I said, just go. It'll be once in a lifetime opportunity, just go.
That's pretty good. I tell you what, your husband's a lucky man.
On many fronts. At that time, Cole was getting a national championship. They were only big major facility on campus at the time, so they were getting a lot of national championship games.
Yeah. They had an Eastern Regional, but when they didn't have the national, it seemed like an Eastern Regional was there every year. So
yeah,
interesting.
And this is my daughter, so we're loaded.
Hello. This time it's off of mute, so hopefully you guys can hear me.
Oh yeah.
So my question is for both of you. When you look back at the experiences off the court, is there any situation that stands out where you would have handled differently if you knew then what you know now?
Good question, Billy. I'll give you one situation which I think was kind of tells you where Gary and myself and some of our teammates were. We used to go down to the Howard Theater, which is in DC on 14th Street, as you all know.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the show, Gary, but we went down there and we had a great time. So we were not afraid to do things. I think the biggest adjustment, Billy, was the frats. At the time, they were not open to myself and Pete. So I think that was the biggest challenge with us, because Gary and those guys, they were all in frats. They were heavily sought after, but Pete and I were not. I think that was the biggest, if there was a separation of us, that was it. Other than that, I thought we did most of everything together, Gary.
And Billy, I used to hang around the one fraternity house, but I didn't have any money, so I just kind of, they had free beer there. I'd go down there. But the big thing for me was probably a little naive at times. In other words, it's hard to say what affected you, as I was playing ball. I mean, we were sensitive to issues, and there was some things. I remember one situation with Jack Zane the old SID, not, yeah, no, the other SID, whatever his name was back then, but he struggled once in a while. And, you know, I always felt that you never got the credit you deserved, you know, for what you did, because people say, well, it just happened that way. No, it might not have happened that way if it was somebody else in that situation. And people don't seem to realize that. And just how big of a deal that was to go into the ACC, because there weren't many people that thought there was anything wrong with the ACC the way it was. You know, it's just an all-white conference, good basketball, you know, that type of thing. And I think Bud Milligan, to his credit, you know, was willing to do that. And I'm sure Bud was criticized in the coaching circles.
I'm certain of that. Yeah, certain of that. No, Billy, I do think of one, and I think you heard this when I spoke at my grandkids' school. I got into I initiated an altercation. And Gary, I don't think I've ever told you this. And I signed up to put up with anything from anybody outside the Maryland family. And something was said to me by a teammate, which I felt I didn't sign up for this. And I actually started an altercation in the training room. And I had to go to Coach Fells and apologize and let him do whatever he wanted. And he supported me. And I strongly felt anybody outside ACC, anybody outside of us, but I will not tolerate it inside our family. And that player wound up never doing anything in Maryland, leaving after 1 year. So he's never a contributing factor to our program. But if I could do it again, I would have swallowed my pride, Billy, and walked off. I told you that earlier.
Yeah, when he told that story at my son's school, all the kids started cheering.
Yeah, and I had explained to them that I was wrong. They supported me. I'm saying, no, I was wrong. I should not have done that. And they were like cheering like crazy. So I was wrong, Billy.
I am here.
Hey,
Dad, how
now.
you doing, Coach? How you doing?
Doing good,
doing well.
good, Damian.
Got a question for Dad. Got a question for you and Coach. Coach, growing up, my father always said Oscar Robertson was the best basketball all around that he ever saw play the game. I'm just curious to see, out of the players that are playing in today's game, which players would you say are the all around best? And which story did my dad tell me about his time at Maryland?
Well, which story did Billy tell you about his time at Maryland? I don't know. I hope we can talk about it though. No, but I thought Oscar Robertson, he was the consummate player. He did whatever his team had to do to win games. I always felt that about Oscar Robertson. And, you know, there's players today that, you know, people forget Oscar Robertson was probably 6'5", 6'6", very strong for back then. But now you look at the Greek Freak at 6'11", you look at LeBron at 6'9", 275. They're different players. You know, the game has progressed to that point where these guys can do anything with the ball, even though they're 6'10", 6'11". And it's just a completely different game now that, but I will say this, a player as good as Oscar Robertson, he would have adjusted to today's game. He could play today. He would have lifted the weights. He would have, you know, watched his weight. He got a little heavy toward the end of his career and things like that. But it's so different now what players do, especially at the NBA level, to ensure the maximum number of years, because they're making so much money. You can't let yourself go and not make that money.
Right. Got one more question for you guys. With all the social issues going on today, as a young kid watching you both on the sidelines and loving the sport of basketball, I would say that basketball, rooting for my favorite team, the Maryland Terps, it helped galvanize all the fans because you're rooting for one team. What would you say to the people out there in Maryland Nation that want to show support to all the people that are on the front lines?
Wow. I'll let you go first with that, Gary.
Yeah, well, I think that part of being in the United States, you should have the ability to express yourself. In other words, anytime people try not to let people express themselves, I don't care, you know, which side of that, you have to let people express yourself. Where it gets, you know, that fine line is drawn is what is violence, what determines that? Now, what's that factor? But in terms of protest, you know, our country was founded protesting against the British. And so protest is part of our fabric. It's okay. It's just that we have to do a good job with it. And as you know, somebody that, you know, spent a lot of my time, my coaching career at Maryland, it's great to see so many people involved. We want them involved with our university, making the university better, you know, whether it's sports, academics, whatever it is. And I think Maryland's done a pretty good job trying to diversify, and hopefully we can do a better job in the future.
Yeah, and Damien, I'm strongly in support of anyone who Gary says peacefully protest. And I've learned to listen to people. You know, if somebody tells you there's a challenge, who am I to tell them it's not real? That's their truth, if you will. And anyone who's involved with anything needs allies. When I say allies, I'm talking about people who don't look like you and necessarily have the same affiliation as you. But any great movement needs allies. And we all should be open. If you look at the college campus, look at your sports teams, very diverse. And we should be attuned to all the issues that affect those people. And you've got to be open to do that and be willing to learn something, you know. And my theory was, I heard a sermon a couple of weeks ago, and the sermon, it spoke of the new norm with the new me versus the new norm with the old me. We were not going to be the same group of people after this that we were. Hopefully we're not. And that's the hope that I have, Damien.
Thank you. I don't think I'm muted now. So Billy.
Dave, how are you? How you doing?
I'm doing great. And how about yourself?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Hey, I remember the time I was competing in nationals in Orlando, and you closed your office at Disney, and you and your secretary come over and watch me compete.
Yeah, I remember that.
You remember that?
Yeah.
And are you still the director of casting services at Disney, or have you?
David, I've been retired almost 10 years now. That's in the past.
wow.
So far. I can't remember where I used to work, David.
Time flies when you're having fun. I'm still competing. I was down at the Pan Am Games in Orlando last year or so. But good for you, and always great to see you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Billy, I just wanted to ask a question because I put makeup on and I wanted to be on the video, but
And thank you, by the way, for setting this up, Maureen. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. But I was struck by what you said about watching your neighbor kid. And I know you and my dad talked when you were at Towson High.
Mhm.
We used to go watch you at Carver in the playground there. And I'm wondering what we as a community, can we lure you back to Maryland to help some of these kids and give them the guidance and the exposure to other cultures, other people, and change the world. So
No,
moving back.
I would like to be a person of, I guess, of impact, and I guess you don't really know, just how much impact you do have. And I recently I told my daughter, I recently got a request from a young kid in Kentucky, Gary. He sent me 2 pieces of paper to sign, and he sent me $20 for my autograph. Either I'm cheap, or I haven't figured out what the deal is there, but here's a kid in Kentucky 50 years after I played. And that blows my mind. I would love to be a resource. Gary had a couple of players that lived down this area, and they finished school. They came into town. I gladly talked. We all are a wealth of knowledge. I hope Gary is using his experience to help other people. You have a great wealth of knowledge, Gary. And anyone you can help, you listen to, you talk to, and that's who I want to be.
Yeah, no, that was my experience in coaching. As you know, obviously Billy well knows, you do so much off the court with players. In other words, they come there at 18, they're going to 22 if they stay the 4 years. And during that time, you gain a different feel. You learn from the players as well as the players hopefully learn from the coach, because you find out about a guy, what his background was coming up, and you just admire the guy because he made it. He made it coming from a very difficult situation. Or you see a player that's wasting what he had coming up. He never took advantage of his situation. So there's a lot of things there that are good. And I still get a chance to talk to some people back on campus once in a while. And I think just real quickly, all these things, the one and done in college basketball and all that, whether you pay for a likeness and all those things. Well, here's the thing. Too much of that is just about the top 20 players. Like on a good Maryland team, if I had one guy that might have a chance to make the NBA, that was a lot. Very, very few teams have multiple players. And so the other 10 guys on scholarship, they're the guys that need the money sometimes. They're the guys. It's not the guys that, like Zion Williamson's going to get $100 million contract when he leaves Duke. Okay, fine, for his shoes. Well, I need a guy that has to get week to week, to be as good a student as he can be, to be as good a player as he can be. And I think hopefully things, and this might be an offshoot of the things that are going on right now. Hopefully these kids will get that opportunity, because for what schools make off of men's basketball and football, the NCAA scholarship is so bad, in terms of what a kid can get and what he should get to make him feel like he's competing against all the other college students.
So
All right.
hopefully, Maureen, yes, we could. I will be able to in the future. I hope so.
Great.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you.
Thank you.
Your
Jim,
mom
did-
says hi.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy. Both of them are together.
Snuffy, how are you?
I would say, watching both their teams over the years and knowing Gary a little bit and Billy a lot better because we worked together for 6 years, both their teams played hard. The question I would have is the game today, and Gary, I think I asked you this a couple of years ago at one of the Cal Ripken benefits in September. And Billy, you alluded to it in your comments that you didn't like the recruiting part.
Yeah.
What do you see today that really impacts the game positively from what's going on in the recruiting world? And Gary, you're not that far removed from it. And Billy, you alluded to it in your comments. I have my own opinion about what's going on and probably can't be aired at this point. But I'd like both of you to maybe give me some feedback on what you see and what you think needs to be done in the recruiting end.
Gary, let me go first, and you can correct me, because I've been away from the game a long time, so I may be out in left field in this. As I watch the AAUs come down to Disney in the summer, and I'm of the mindset that the AAU influence is far greater than the high school. Just again, that's a long distance observation, and there's so much emphasis on the summer leagues, et cetera, that kids don't develop their games. They don't spend as much time working one-on-one or two-on-two developing their games. So I think it's more of a production, if you would, and playing with the flaws that you have, as opposed to improving. And that's I think that's the advent of the AAU versus Snuffy, the old Baltimore neighborhood league, where kids spend time in the local clubs developing their games, et cetera. So I think it's become very, very conscious AAU, if you will. And that's my observation from afar.
Yeah, I agree. And I remember, in the summertime when we'd play, you were playing outside on the court a lot of times, and there'd be two really good teams waiting to play. So if you lost, you might not play again for an hour.
Yeah.
And so you learned how to play basketball, because if you were a better shooter than me, I was going to give you the ball because I wanted to keep playing. I was going to try to win the game. I don't think all AAU players worry about winning games because they don't know half their teammates. They bring these guys together from all over the place, and all of a sudden they're well, I had 20 and 10, so I did what I wanted to do. But to me, the whole problem is leaving high school now. The recruiting mainly is out of the high school hands, and there's shoe companies involved, there's agents involved, there's AAU coaches involved who are known to give players to certain schools, things like that, in return for some things. And so that's what's got to change. And I don't know an easy way to change it. And I really believe that if you allow, the great players to go leaving high school, you'll get away from some of that, and get the kids in school that want to be there. That, hey, when Duke plays Carolina in a basketball game, no matter who's on the court, it's going to be a great game. And, that's what we got to get back to a little bit, instead of worrying about this star player. Is he happy or not? Or, he's only going to be there for 5 months, 6 months during a basketball season. So hopefully things are changing, and, college basketball will be the benefit of it.
Thank you, Katie. And thanks everyone for their questions this evening. And thank both of you. Audience, that these guys are historic figures on the college basketball landscape for a variety of reasons. And thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. Sports has long been at the salient of cultural change in America. And we can go back and do chapter and verse on that. But it seemed that sports is always ahead of the curve when it comes to helping to create change in this country. let's hope that that can continue as we move forward in very uncertain times. And thank you both for sharing your thoughts on these times and on your great careers as teammates, as coaches, and as friends. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to working with both of you again in the future. Museum fans, we intend to continue with our virtual interviews moving down the road here, and also try and get down to the Babe Ruth birthplace and take a look at the greatest baseball player of all time, born right here in Baltimore City. So thanks, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Mike, thank you. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Bill. I got to give you a call.